Prismatic Evolutions is almost here. In the collector world, people are going nuts trying to get a hold of these cards because it's got all of the EV EX cards, the Eeveelutions and all that. But in the competitive scene, this set is not going to change much, but also going to change a lot. It's kind of weird. Let's talk about it. I'm Jet from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's review the new and existing decks in the Pokemon TCG meta and how they are impacted by Prismatic Evolutions. Prismatic Evolutions is a specialty set. It's a reprint set. We're getting a lot of old cards repackaged in this. We're also getting the Eeveelution cards, but easily the single most impactful card from the set in competitive play is Budew. It may not look like much, it's got the lowest possible HP, but it has the attack Itchy Pollen, where for 0 energy, it does a whopping 10 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, they can't play any item cards from their hand. This is, yes, it's a pathetically weak Pokemon in terms of attack and HP, but item lock is an incredibly powerful effect, and having it on a Pokemon that needs 0 energy means that everyone can play Budew, and a lot of people are playing Budew. Over in Japan, where they've had Prismatic Evolutions, at least their equivalent of it, for about a month now, we have seen about half of all decks in the top 16 use Budew in them. Now, I know this graphic is about a month old. I've seen updated versions. I wasn't able to find them, but this has pretty much held the entire time in Japan, where Budew is absolutely everywhere and item locking so many different decks. So based on where the meta is at, you're either playing Budew to slow your opponent down or you have some sort of counter to Budew. And that's pretty much where the meta is right now. It's mostly all the same stuff, and you're either playing Budew or you're countering Budew. Here's a snapshot that I took from Pokekabook on the week of January 7th. Not sure when this video is coming out, but on the week of January 7th, the meta looks like this. This is a tier list based on, I'm pretty sure this is meta share. Shoutouts to Pokekabook for the list. And at the top, we actually see Dragapult and Gardevoir. Both of these decks have answers to Budew, where Dragapult, once it gets set up, can blast a Budew with Phantom Dive and drop the damage counters and just wipe them off the board, no problem. The Gardevoir's got Monkey Dory, where it can eventually get damage on itself, move that damage off to a Budew, and yeah, one Monkey Dory transfer is going to be enough to take them out. We saw Archaludon win the 5,000 player championships in Japan, where that's just a really fast, aggressive deck that wants to go first, and depending on how it's set up on turn 2, it doesn't really care if Budew is there. And then we see some other decks, Ceruledge ranking really highly here. I'm not sure that's going to hold. Ceruledge hasn't been as strong outside of Japan as it has been in Japan, and I'm curious to see if that holds, or maybe Ceruledge finds its footing in the meta going forward. I'm not sure Budew is going to be the card that does it, but we'll see. Lugia making a bit of a jump here into the A tier, and then that B tier actually has some of our old heavy hitters, including Charizard and Raging Bolt. But yeah, seeing some other archetypes we have in our metagame already, such as an Ancient Box, Miraidon, Klawf, Snorlax Doll, and Gholdengo. Here's where things get really interesting. So Pokekabook did a split of decks based on decks that only made it into the top 4 of City League tournaments, at which point the big 3 becomes very clear, with Dragapult, Gardevoir, and Archaludon taking up over half of the meta. That's almost 60% between these 3 decks are in the top 4. So Archaludon stocks right now. Archaludon's been okay to good, but it feels like Archaludon is due for a rise here, especially in the Prismatic Evolutions meta, with Gardevoir continuing to be strong and Dragapult possibly getting even stronger. It's been good, but maybe it's finally time for Dragapult to really live up to its full potential. And then this giant gap between those 3 and the other ones, but a lot of strong decks we see here: Lugia, Charizard, Gholdengo, and then yeah, Ceruledge once again still doing very well in Japan. Now let's move over to existing decks, and I went in order of play.limitlesstcg.com. I looked at the decks list based on popularity and worked our way down. So we're going to start with Charizard, which is currently the most popular deck in competitive play. And one of the things I flagged, besides this being a first place list, some of the responses to Badoo. Now, this list doesn't have Badoo in it, but we do have some counters for Badoo. We have the Charmeleon, and we also have Pidgeotto in the list. And Pidgeotto is a card we have not seen up to this point in any sort of deck. With Pidgeot, we usually just evolve up to Pidgeot. But the problem is Badoo item locks, and we have a harder time playing rare candy. This list actually only plays 3 rare candy, and part of that is Badoo locking us out, and part of it is because this deck runs Grand Tree, where once you've got this in play, you can have your basic Pokemon that's been in play for a turn, then evolve up to your stage 1, then evolve up to your stage 2. So you can bypass the need for rare candy and get your stage 2 online on the second turn. This can be great for setting up your Pidgeot. I think the best use for this is Pidgeot. You can also use this to get your Dusknoir in play, but then you're probably going to blow it up right after, and sometimes that's going to be great, but you might want to save that for later. You can also use this to evolve up to Charizard, but keep in mind that if you use Grand Tree to evolve up to Charizard, you don't get Charizard's ability to accelerate 3 energy. So if you're going to use it to power up Charizard, hopefully you have attached energy to a Charmander on the previous turn. The second version of Charizard has joined the dark side with Badoo in its list as an item locker, but it does have its own counter for Badoo in Pokemon League Headquarters, where attacks used by each basic Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's, cost a colorless energy more. Now, this is going to force Badoo to have to attach from hand, and that's something they could do, but then their opponent loses momentum by losing that attachment for turn, having to use it on Badoo versus whatever they were going to attack with on a future turn. So this isn't a foolproof counter, but it is one you can use to put your opponent in an awkward position with their Badoo. Regidrago VSTAR gets hurt pretty bad by Badoo because of the reliance on item cards like Energy Switch and Ultra Ball. It's going to be tough. And now this Regidrago has embraced the dark side and has a Badoo, but we also see the inclusion of Power Glass in the list. This is a tool card that came out in Shrouded Fable, and at the end of your turn, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, you may attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to it. So the thinking here is that Regidrago wants to go first. You attach from hand, you get an energy in the discard pile, and then at the end of your first turn, Power Glass activates, you attach a second energy so that on your following turn, even if you get item locked, you just have to find a Regidrago and an energy and you can get rolling. It's certainly not ideal, but based on my research, Power Glass is pretty much an essential card in Regidrago because you can't rely on the old strats before, because Badoo was just item locking like crazy. Gardevoir is mostly the same, but there's 2 minor tweaks to this list that I noticed and saw some other Gardevoir lists adopting similar strategies here. The first one is Munkidori. Now, we've seen Munkidori in Gardevoir decks before. Of late, I've seen 2 Munkidori in lists, and right now I'm seeing a lot of lists from Japan that have 3 Munkidori. It's awesome. You get to move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponent's Pokemon, but the added benefit here is that moving damage counters, you can use one Munkidori ability and move it on to the Badoo and just knock it out. And we have 3 Munkidori here because we can use 1 to take out the Badoo and the other 2 to soften up our target that we plan on hitting with one of our other attackers. And we even have Energy Switch in the deck, which is something we've never run in Gardevoir before, where it allows you to move, you can move an energy from one of your Pokemon to another Pokemon, but the thinking here is that you have 2 Munkidoris in play, you've got 1 Dark Energy attached to one of them, you use the Adrenabrain ability, and then you Energy Switch to a second Munkidori so that you can move more damage that way. Gholdengo with Palkia is basically the same deck with one difference that really confused me for a little bit, but it makes a lot of sense. When we dive in here, we see 1 copy of Crispin. Now, this lets you grab 2 energies from your deck of different types, and you put one of them in your hand, and you put the other one on one of your Pokemon. And yes, you could use this technically to power up a Gholdengo and then start to power up a Palkia or a Greninja, but what I think this is for is specifically as a Badoo counter, where you've got your Gholdengo in play, and you need you're item locked, so you can't get energy with Earthen Vessel or anything like that. So you play the Crispin, you attach a medal to the Gholdengo, and then you have the second energy in hand, which you can use Make It Rain for. You discard that energy and take out the Badoo that way. Gholdengo with Togekiss does not have the Crispin tech in it, but it does have a Monkey-Dory in it. You're going to see a lot of decks that didn't have Monkey-Dory in the past adopt Monkey-Dory. So when the Badoo is item locking you, they're either going to lock you till they have 3, at which point Monkey-Dory can move 3 damage counters off of your Gholdengo or whatever's in the active and knock out that Badoo before you actually use your attack, or you're able to tank a hit and then use Monkey-Dory to just take an easy KO on the Badoo, whether it's in the active or on the bench. Lost Zone box is still largely played with Pikachu EX. This list is largely the same. It does not have a Badoo counter, but it does have a Terra counter in the new Regigigas. This is a huge big basic Pokemon, single prize, 160 HP with a massive retreat cost, but it does have the attack Jewel Breaker, where for 4 colorless energy, you do 100 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Terra Pokemon, this attack does 230 more damage. That is 330 on a Terra Pokemon. That's a one-hit KO on Charizard EX and everything smaller than that. So being able to uptrade on a massive Pokemon with a single prize Pokemon is huge. And you can power this up with 2 Mirage Gates, making it a lot more realistic to use in a match. I did see a number of players in Japan still playing Lost Zone Giratina. It doesn't really win, but it has a number of spots in top 16 in their City League tournaments. And the only real adjustment here is 1 copy of Monkey-Dory. Again, if you're able to tank a hit, you can move that damage and take out the Badoo before you actually use your attack. I should note here that Monkey-Dory is also good as a counter for Pikachu EX. You can move some of your damage onto the Pikachu EX, at which point its Resolute Heart ability doesn't work anymore, and you can just knock them out. Here's the Miraidon list that got top 8 at the Champions League that had 5,000 players, and Miraidon seems to be a deck that is always slept on the biggest stages. Miraidon always does great, and this is no exception. 6th place out of 5,000 players, and this is looking largely the same as in Surging Sparks, but I do see 1 copy of Minior here. Not every list ran Minior, and I was thinking initially like, oh, that could be a counter for Badoo, but this attack does 20 damage for each colorless energy in your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost, and Badoo has 0 retreat cost, so this is not for a counter for Badoo, but it will one-hit KO Snorlax in that Snorlax stall matchup. So this is probably there for that. And you will be doing big damage against like an Iron Hands or an Iron Thorns, but you're not one-hit KOing them with this attack. You'll be doing a lot of damage though. One more Miraidon list that's a little more of a conventional build with all of the cards we normally see. Even see a Zapdos here, which has kind of gone in and out of lists in recent days, and this player has Zapdos in there, but otherwise Miraidon doesn't really change. As far as Badoo goes, you basically just want to win the coin flip, go second against a Badoo player, and then Iron Hands them for 2 prizes. Or if you go first, get set up so that you've got an attacker ready so that even if they item lock you, you just blast them out of the way anyway. Besides having built-in answers for Badoo, Dragapult is also running Badoo. This one actually has 2 copies of Badoo, and certain decks that exploit the Badoo strategy do run multiple copies of Badoo. And Badoo's amazing here because Dragapult can be a slow and clunky deck to set up, and having the Badoo in there to item lock and potentially 2 can give you enough time to build up your board. And one of the big additions to this deck is a different way of countering Badoo, and that is Lance. This is a card that lets you search for up to 3 basic dragon Pokemon, reveal them and put them into your hand, and then shuffle your deck. You're not relying on items like Ultra Ball in order to find your Pokemon out of the deck. You can play Lance when you're in item lock state and grab a bunch of Pokemon so that you can continue building your board without getting item locked into oblivion. Dragapult Iron Thorns, despite being popular outside of Japan, isn't seeing a lot of play in Japan, which is actually where the list originates from. But I did pull up a 10th place list here from Tokyo, and this looks pretty much the same as it always has. Dragapult Charizard does not see as much play as a it did before, but I did find this list from Japan running that archetype. Again, this one has a copy of Badoo in it to slow our opponents down, and it also has a copy of Lance in order to grab our dragon Pokemon without having to need items. Japan recently hosted a 5,000 player tournament, and the big winner of that tournament is this Archaludon Dialga list. I will admit, when I covered this deck a couple of weeks ago, I was skeptical about its potential power level, and well, as it turns out, maybe I was wrong all along. Or at the very least, in light of where the meta is at in Prismatic Evolutions, the conditions are a bit better for Archaludon Dialga. Now, this list doesn't really see any changes from Surging Sparks to now, but one of the big benefits of Archaludon in a Badoo world is that you go first, you get some energy in the discard pile, and then on turn 2, you just have to find Archaludon, attach energy from the discard pile, and start swinging, and you're not worried too much about the item lock, assuming you can get a hot start. Even without Dialga, Archaludon is doing well. This list looks pretty much the same as what we have seen in Surging Sparks. We do see this player has teched in Hawlucha for a little extra damage, but one new card here that is coming out in Prismatic Evolutions is Black Belt Training. This is a card that lets you get plus 40 damage when you are attacking a Pokemon EX. Archaludon is a deck that has some... It does 220 damage, which is good, but it's not great, especially against some bigger Pokemon like a Roaring Moon, Iron Hands, and a Raging Bolt. And being able to swing now for up to 260 is fantastic, helping us take out all the big basics in the game. And this deck has Pal Pads, so we can use it again if need be. Klawf Terapagos is an archetype that got really popular in the Surging Sparks format, and it's pretty much the same except for it is adopted Badoo, and we have 2 copies of Badoo, no less, to slow our opponents down while we set up. Hydreigon Pidgeot is largely the same as we've seen it before. The 2 big updates, yes, this deck has Badoo in it as well, but we also see the middle evolutions here. The Zweilous and the Pidgeotto are in the deck, again, as countermeasures to Badoo item locking us. Even if we get locked over the course of multiple turns, we can just evolve into our stage 1 and then ultimately get into our stage 2 and start our offense. Roaring Moon EX is largely the same as before. Some lists had the new Miraidon from Surging Sparks, some didn't, but I noticed that a number of Roaring Moon decks have since adopted Monkey Dory into them, and this is going to be their way of countering Badoo. Again, once you tank a hit, you can move damage off of your Pokemon onto the Badoo and take them out. Lugia VSTAR is pretty much the same. There are different lists depending on how many Chinchinos you want. This one runs a 3-2 line. I saw some that went 3-3. I saw some that went 1-1, and then they brought in other attackers like a Weirdeer, for example. But one of the consistent new additions to the deck is that new Regigigas, which has the potential to one-hit KO a Terra Pokemon, including Charizard EX, and because we are using the Archeops engine, we can cover the cost of this attack no problem. Now, this deck always had one-hit KO potential with the Chinchino, but Regigigas is a basic Pokemon that also only needs 4 energy to one-hit KO a Charizard versus a Chinchino, which is an evolution Pokemon, and it needs 5. Terapagos Duskmar is a fun deck that did kind of slip in popularity as Surging Sparks went on and as a Stellar Crown went on. I still think the deck is pretty good, if a little flawed, but it did see like the slightest bit of a buff with the new Hoot Hoot. It has 80 HP, so it's a little high, a little tankier here, and it has the ability Insomnia, where this Pokemon can't be asleep, which I guess sleep effects are really not existent, but it is 80 HP, which also does mean you can't use Buddy Buddy Poffin, so that's kind of unfortunate, but you do get a little more HP, and if you're really concerned about sleep effects, you have this as well. Chien-Pao, despite it seeing a drop in play, is just an inherently strong deck. I only see it here once in a blue moon, but it seems to do well when the handful of players that are still playing it are using it. And here we got a first place list from Okinawa, and we have a very similar list to what we've seen in the past. They did cut their Beebrilled line down to 1-1. We do see a Badoo here. We see the Kyogre, which is a tech that is definitely more popular in Japan than it is outside of Japan, giving you a heavy hitting bench sniper. Noticing there's no Greninja in this list either. That's kind of funky. But we also see of course, the new Regigigas, which can one-hit KO Terra Pokemon. Palkia Terapagos is basically the same deck. Palkia is your main attacker, you fill the board with a ton of different Pokemon, especially with Area Zero Underdepths, and you are swinging for big damage. The only real difference here is that it has Badoo now to item lock our opponents early on. Palkia with Dusknoir is pretty much the same, just at a glance here. This looks exactly the same. There are no new cards from Prismatic Evolutions in here, other than actually there is. This one has 2 Badoo in it. For anyone playing Conkeldurr, here's a 5th place list that I pulled from Japan. This looks pretty much the same as what Conkeldurr has been in the past. At the very least, there are no new cards from Prismatic Evolutions in here. Regigigas Pikachu. Now, it's actually kind of funny because it seemed obvious to me that when they revealed the new Pikachu from Prismatic Evolutions, that I was like, yeah, you put this in the Regigigas deck. But actually, not every Regigigas player had this Regigigas in there. So I pulled one that maybe didn't perform quite as well as some of the others, but still had the new Regigigas in here because it just makes a ton of sense. You can power this up with the Energy Acceleration Regigigas and go. And it's not perfect because Regigigas accelerates 3 energy and this needs 4, so you're going to have to attach from hand as well. But the power potential here, it seems too strong to not include this, especially when Pikachu is going to come up short hitting a Charizard. You can play this instead and take those one-hit KOs on those big Stage 2 EXs. We need to talk about the elephant in the room. Yes, Prismatic Evolutions is a set all about Eevee and the Eeveelutions, and technically, this one Eevee deck did make top 8 at a local tournament. But I have to say that based on my research here, the Eeveelution cards have not done well in tournament, and they don't look to be a factor. It's actually a miracle that this deck made top 8. But it is cool that you can run a deck with all Eeveelutions, and for that, that's awesome, but the deck is just not powerful enough to hang with where the metagame is right now. One of the cool things about this deck is that you can run 8 Eevees so that you can have 1 for each Eeveelution. The non-multi-prize Eevee has the ability Boosted Evolution, where as long as this Pokemon's in the active spot, it can evolve during your first turn or on the turn that you play it. So really nice being able to go straight into an Eeveelution EX, and that's really handy if you had better Eeveelutions to go into. But we also have an Eevee EX, and the awesome thing about this is that its ability allows it to evolve into another Eeveelution EX. So normally EX cards don't evolve themselves, but because you've got this Eevee EX, you can evolve into a Vaporeon, a Jolteon, and so on. It's not as instant as the regular Eevee, but it does give you another Eevee that you can bench that's also a little tanky with 200 HP. Energy management is going to be a nightmare in this deck, so we are relying on Glass Trumpet to get our energy on board, where you can choose 2 energy from the discard pile and attach it to your colorless Pokemon in 1 to each of your colorless Pokemon. So you're gonna have to know which Eeveelution you're gonna evolve into when you use Glass Trumpet so that you are attaching the right energy to the right Pokemon. Also, because this only works on colorless Pokemon, you have to attach it to the Eevees before you evolve up. Sparkling Crystal is another handy tool here, which reduces our attack cost by 1, making it a little more realistic for our Eeveelutions to attack. Since we're here, we might as well run down what each of these Eeveelutions does. Vaporeon EX has 280 HP. It has the attack Severe Squall, where it does 60 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon EX. Don't apply weakness and resistance for that damage, so 60 damage is not bad. You might take multiple smaller prize Pokemon, like smaller Pokemon that have 60 HP or less, but not necessarily the best attack in the world. And then Aquamarine for a fire, water, and a lightning does 280 damage, and you can't attack on the next turn. Yes, you are taking out all of the basic EXs and stage 1, a lot of the basic or stage 1 EXs, but 280, it's fine, but not being able to attack the next turn is not great. So overall, Vaporeon not too hot. Jolteon EX is one of the 2 Eeveelutions that I've seen get a little more success, and by I mean a little, I've seen it in like 3 deck lists that have made top 16 versus the 1 deck list of all of them together. So I would not get my hopes up for any of these Eeveelutions standing out on their own. This Jolteon has 2 attacks, Flashing Spear for a lightning and a colorless does 60 damage, and you can discard up to 2 basic lightning energy, 2 basic energy from your bench Pokemon. This attack does 90 more damage for each card you've discarded this way. So being able to discard 2 energy, not necessarily off the Jolteon either, you could be swinging for 250 damage, and if you are playing it in a shell with the Glass Trumpet, you can use that to reload energy. If you are playing it in a lightning deck, you could use Electric Generator. This isn't necessarily the worst. Maybe there's potential of having Jolteon work outside of an Eeveelution deck, but yeah, just right now, still, certainly there are better options for this type of attack than Jolteon. Flareon is the other of the Eeveelutions that I have seen. I've seen Flareon Jolteon decks that work together, but even then it's still like 3 to 4 decks that have made top 16 versus just 1. So not necessarily much to write home about. Flareon's got 2 attacks, Burning Charge for a fire and a colorless does 130 damage, and you can search your deck for up to 2 basic energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. So this could be a cool first attack, take out some basic smaller evolution Pokemon, and then power up something on the bench. So I don't mind that per se. And then it also has that attack where you do 280 damage and you can't attack on the next turn. Espeon EX has the attack Psych Out for a Psychic and 2 colorless, does 160 damage, and you discard a random card from your opponent's hand. That can be annoying, but I don't necessarily think that's strong enough to build any, to truly disrupt your opponent with any consistency. We also have Amazes. I'm not sure that's the, that's the shout outs to Pokemon proxies for the translations here, but for a Grass, Psychic, and a Dark Energy, you get to devolve each of your opponent's evolve Pokemon by shuffling the highest stage evolution card on it onto your opponent's deck. Throwing all those evolutions back in the deck is cool. I guess if you've got a bunch of damage on the board, maybe it's the Vaporeon sending up the damage, and Espeon, when they evolve, shuffles those Pokemon in. I still don't think it's going to be enough. It's an interesting attack. I just don't know how you build a strategy around it. Umbreon has 2 attacks, Moon Mirage for a dark and 2 colorless, does 160 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused. This could potentially help you take 1-hit KOs on bigger multi-price Pokemon if they try and swing through the confusion and they hit tails. Not necessarily the most reliable attack in the world. And then Onix for a lightning, psychic, and dark. You discard all the energy from this Pokemon and take a prize card. And on the surface, yes, that seems kind of cool. If Mimikyu's blocking you, you can just take a prize around them. But for your attack, for all that energy and you're taking only 1 prize when there are attackers in the game that have attacks that use that much energy or less that are taking multiple prizes just by knocking Pokemon out, it's not that great of a value proposition, and there are probably just better attacks you could use instead of trying to cheat a prize out. There will probably be times where cheating a prize here is cool, but I think more often than not, this is a gimmick. Leafeon has the attack Verdant Storm for a grass and a colorless energy, does 60 damage for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Against certain high energy decks, this is going to be awesome, but this is not always gonna work in your favor. And then the second attack, Moss Agate for a grass, fire, and water, does 230 damage, and you heal at 100 damage from each of your bench Pokemon. That's pretty crazy healing, to be honest, but still maybe not enough. 230 is a good number. Healing 100 damage is fine. I actually think there could be some potential here. I'm not sure how much relevant the healing is, especially with the format being where it is, where we're taking a lot of 1-hit KOs, so we're not leaving much damage on the board anyway. Maybe someone can talk me into Leafeon possibly being a thing, but again, in my research, this one didn't see a lot of play at all. Glaceon has the attack Frost Bullet for a water and a colorless energy, does 110 damage and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. A little bit of snipe here, that's fine, I guess. And then its second attack for a grass, water, and dark energy. U-Class? Not sure how to read that. Knock out one of your opponent's Pokemon that has exactly 6 damage counters on it. So maybe there's some synergy between the Vaporeon and the Glaceon getting exactly 6 damage counters on there to take a KO, but that feels way too situational to be reliable. Sylveon EX is the same card that we saw in Surging Sparks with the same attacks, 160 damage, plus you take 100 less damage on the following turn, or the one where you shuffle 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon back into the deck. the neat ideas here, but these have not lit the tournament world on fire. I know that's not every deck, but I tried to go through the most popular ones, and by the time we got to Regigigas Pikachu, we were getting pretty deep in the weeds. So we're going to leave it there. Again, this is not going to be the biggest meta shift in the world per se. It's just one card that is really going to shake things up for a lot of different decks. What say you? Are you excited for Prismatic Evolutions, whether excited as a player or a collector of the card game? Honestly, I like to buy packs here and there, and I'm dreading the idea of going to the store to try and buy Prismatic Evolutions. I feel like I'm already screwed and everything's all sold out, or I'm gonna have to stand in line just for me to buy. Like, I usually just get like 2-3 pack blisters on launch day, and that's it, and that's enough for me. And with the combination of just not that many playable cards and the demand for this being so high, and prices are probably going to be high as well, I'm not sure if I'm all that interested in buying the physical cards right away. But in terms of playing on PTCG Live, I will definitely be there as early as possible, and we'll try out all of these updated decks, even if they're not really all that updated. Are you excited for the Badoo future? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at @InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at @InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website inthirdperson.com for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.